So if you're ready, I'm ready. Maybe you should start by introducing yourself.
I am Derek Sutherland. I'm the co-founder and CEO of CT Fusion, which is a spin-off company from the University of Washington in Seattle, where I'm also a research associate. I started in fusion as an undergraduate at MIT in 2008, and now I'm nearly finished with my doctoral work, and we're trying to get this company started to pursue a path of fusion that is based on compact toroidal fusion energies, hence the name CT Fusion.
So there's a lot of people that are going to listen to this and they know nothing about fusion. How would you describe or define fusion to someone who knows nothing about it?
How will I probably start with the name as it suggests? Fusion is just the process in which light elements like hydrogen are fused together into heavier ones, like helium, for instance. This releases a ton of energy by Einstein's famous equation E equals mc squared. That's at least what fusion is. The practical implications of fusion is that it is a nuclear process, which, the nuclear word is sometimes scary to people, but it is much safer than its cousin fission, which is what you think of when you think of a nuclear power, because there is no intrinsic radioactive waste to the process, and there's also a very low risk of a meltdown. And so those are the two main reasons why we pursue fusion in the first place, is because it's so much safer and cleaner than fission energy.
What prompted your interest in plasma physics generally and fusion specifically? How old were you when you knew you wanted to do this as a profession?
I think, I started really getting introduced to the topic towards the end of high school. I remember sitting in my high school physics class, and my teacher at the time, we were going through a unit on nuclear energy, and we spent a grand total of about a day on fusion. And he said that, if anyone out there can solve fusion before he dies, that he'll give him $100. So I was like, well, back in high school, $100 was a lot of money. As a graduate student, it's still a lot of money. And so I figured, hey, might as well throw my hat in. And so then I got accepted to MIT, and I really wanted to do fusion. And as I got more and more into the physics, I just fell more in love with it because of its just complexity and its beauty when you actually get down to the base equations governing everything. And so since I was hooked and passionate about it from the very foundation of what it is, the idea of actually getting a fusion reactor working is extremely difficult idea and prospect. And I really like hard problems to work on. And so it really was just the perfect problem that was extremely difficult, had really interesting physics, and something I really feel like I could devote my time and energy on. And so that really is what has brought me to the point now where I'm actually wanting to start a separate company from the university to pursue a particular path.
I think we're going to get to the company in a minute, but you're joining an effort that is several decades old and it's come in many flavors and many forms with lots of different people involved. So I'm wondering, what is your impression of the fusion effort as it stands today?
Well, just from my short experience in the field thus far, I feel like I've had a pretty diverse set of experiences, working at national labs, at private fusion companies, and at universities. And even just learning about the history of fusion, it's absolutely incredible the remarkable progress we've made over the decades. We've made so much progress as a community that we're now just on the edge of making a net gain fusion reactor for the very first time with the ITER project. And so I really feel like we're fortunate enough to really start thinking about the other side of the fusion issues. One of the biggest problems is the economics of fusion power. And we can really use the considerable amount of knowledge we've gained over the decades to start exploring new methods that may be more economical than the mainline tokamak accelerator devices. And so this isn't to talk down or say that the tokamak accelerator aren't great ideas. They are great ideas. In fact, they are still the leading candidates for a fusion reactor to work right now. But what we must face and increasingly face as we get further towards commercialization is that these very large, expensive projects might not be something that we can bring to the grid in an economical fashion. And so I think that you're seeing a considerable amount of interest in the private sector in fusion, especially on the alternative side, just because of their economic implications if we do get them to work. And so I certainly welcome this private interest in addition to the continued governmental support But this is a worldwide effort, and there is not a single one person that is going to solve fusion. It's a team effort through and through. So I think there is a future for both public and private funding of fusion programs, and I think the more active we are, the better.
You came to the University of Washington to work under Dr. Jerome. You started with the spherical tokamak, and when you got to the university, they were working on the inductive heating process. Can you talk a little bit about where they were in that process when you started and how that technology works?
So before I came to the University of Washington, I was working on a high-field tokamak that we called the arc reactor at MIT, and that was headed up by Professor Dennis White, who's the head of the Plasma Science and Fusion Center at MIT right now. Coming off of that experience, I came into the University of Washington. Where the group was at the time was that they had made some really great experimental progress with the head-SI Spheromak experiment. And Professor Jarboes, who's my PI and advisor right now, decided that it was probably time to start looking into what an eventual reactor concept would look like if we would take our current device and scale it up to a commercial scale. And so I came in there, and we started off actually as a class, just like we did at MIT. Then as we got towards the end of that class, classes are never long enough to actually generate a publishable document at the end. So I worked on it for another year and a half or so with Professor Jarboes, and we eventually finalized the Dynomak reactor concept together, and we published it in Fusion Engineering and Design in April of 2014. And so I came in before any of the reactor concept was conceived. And basically, we worked together along with a group of colleagues from my class to form the actual reactor. And so the whole idea is, can we make steady-state magnetic fusion energy more cost-effective with the Dynomak? The main focus of the Dynomak is using this method of steady inductive helicity injection to actually form and sustain a Spheromak. And so the nice thing about Spheromak is they are extremely simple from an engineering standpoint. You end up removing two of the coil sets. So you're removing the toroidal field coil set, also removing the central solenoid.
So what you're saying is you go from 3 to 1 coils.
Right. By removing those superconducting coils, you're saying that, okay, well, we're not going to have those, so we need to put that same amount of current, roughly, in the plasma itself to make sure that it keeps working. And so since that current is flowing in the plasma itself, you get resistive heating, just like you would in any wire with a resistance. And that heating is sufficient in the Spheromak to heat up all the way to the pressure limit, which is synonymous with saying that that is as good of confinement as you can get with that particular magnetic configuration. And as long as you're driving plasma current against resistive decay, then you are sustaining the device in steady state.
So basically, you replace the missing coils with a current inside the plasma, which you create.
The heating of this device is old school in the sense that it's the first source of heating that any fusion reactor really uses that has a plasma current. And so that's a lot of lingo, but it is kind of the more precise way of saying that. And you hit on another point that Spheromaks are able to confine more pressure. And so the way we talk about that is we say that the Spheromak has higher beta, which is just the thermal pressure divided by the magnetic pressure, a normalized pressure. And that's important.
Why is that so important?
Whenever you're thinking about designing a fusion reactor, one of the most important equations is the fusion power density. And so what that means is how many watts of fusion power per unit volume can you make? That equation scales as beta to the second power and magnetic field to the fourth power. And so what that tells you is that there are two ways to reach very high fusion power densities. One of those is to have a relatively low beta but a very large magnetic field, effectively what the arc reactor at MIT does. The other approach is the beta route. If you run at higher beta, you are using the volume of your reactor more efficiently for generating fusion power So those are kind of the two different ways of thinking about how to build a successful fusion reactor. The beta is typically limited by the plasma configuration you're using. For example, in a tokamak and an accelerator, the beta is pretty small. And so to compensate for that, they need rather large magnetic fields, which drive up the cost. Instead, in the Dynomak, we try to exploit high beta configurations. If you can get a high beta configuration to work, then it'll be cheaper.
I asked Derek Sutherland why he would not add the Dynomak to the existing University of Washington experimental setup and instead go for a private fusion company.
At first, we weren't sure if there would be any interest from the Office of Fusion Energy Science, which we've been funded by for the past few decades. It seems like the alternates are all flocking to the private sector because the majority of the funding from the Office of Fusion Energy Sciences is heavily focused on tokamaks and the ITER collaboration right now. At first, we weren't sure which path would be best for us, but after talking with government officials and the Department of Energy, we decided that the path to go down is in the private sector. Ideally, I would like a public-private partnership, which in effect is kind of what we have at the moment. It seems like the private sector is much more interested in alternative fusion. Not that I badmouth the Office of Fusion Energy Sciences at all, but I'm just saying that if you want to do something other than a tokamak or accelerator, there seems to be a lot of interest from the private sector.
The Office of Fusion Energy Science is very good at what they currently do. There seems to be issues with adding new concepts. To be fair to them, their mandate is really set by Congress. It's looking more and more like we have to get some sort of bill passed to get change at that level.
Yeah, we're investing in the ITER project, which is a very big project, very involved, as we try to build the first net gain fusion reactor ever. I mean, the U.S. has an international obligation that we have to meet. With rising obligations for ITER and very tough budgetary climate on Capitol Hill, we are almost fighting with a zero-sum game right now as far as the budgetary caps are. It's not that they don't want to help, it's just that you have to prioritize when budgets are thin. Right now, the top priority of the department is to, support ITER. I can understand that decision. I'm upset that that's the situation, that just is what the situation is.
You founded CT Fusion in August of 2015, and so you're the CEO, and you have made up the organizational chart. Who else is in the company?
So right now, I'm the acting CEO. Professor Jarboes is the president. We recently hired Aaron Hossack, who is another colleague, and he's our chief technical officer. We also have help from various business advisors, and we are looking to expand in the coming months.
I watched your TEDx talk at the University of Washington. Very good talk. At the close of the talk, you asked the audience, in lieu of getting a PhD in plasma physics, to advocate for changes to the federal funding. What can people do if they want to make a change in how fusion is done?
Right. A lot of it, as you mentioned, does come down to Congress. And so it really does just come down to letting your representatives know that this is an energy source that we genuinely want to have on the grid in a reasonable amount of time. And to let them know that they should take steps to make that happen by increasing levels of fusion funding, then I think it would be much easier to pursue an all-of-the-above approach instead of just focusing on a particular device because of budgetary constraints. You don't put all your eggs in one basket. And that's honestly what we need until we get a working fusion reactor on the grid. Jury is still out on to what the solution's going to be. With government funding, we're allowed to tell all the details of what we're working on and also of the breakthroughs and the roadblocks we're facing without restraint. Even increasing the fusion funding modestly about what it is can lead to dramatic returns. I would hope that there would be a way to strike a balance between all of these opposing forces so that investors are happy, scientists are happy, and we're all making progress as a community, regardless of where the money comes from.
The issue of information sharing versus information withholding runs through all of fusion research, and you meet people from one side of the issue to the other. So is there anything else that you would like to add that you think needs to be said?
One thing that I've been actually talking with ARPA-E about, the Advanced Research Project Division of the DOE, is that whether there's a role for ARPA-E to play in helping foster better connections between all of these alternative fusion approaches. And I don't want to say too much, but I have to commend them for their really fresh and inspiring outlook on fusion development. They are looking for low-cost, fast approaches to deploying fusion onto the grid. There's a lot of different ideas across the spectrum that I think should be tried, and overall they have relatively low development costs compared to the manual. With a rather modest increase to the ARPA-E alternative fusion program, I think we could fund a lot more of these alternative ideas. Having a public-private partnership really be the best of both worlds, because you have the government help dispel some of the investors' concerns